Welcome to Parenting with Vanessa Colon. Today we have a special person that I just adore and love, Dr. Lily Tan from Kaiser.
Hello.
Nice to have you. Can you give me a little background about yourself before we get into this?
Sure. I'm an OBGYN at Kaiser Permanente in San Francisco. I'm the director of our gynecologic surgery service, and I started there in 2005, so I've been there for a while. I was recruited from my private practice to head up their minimally invasive gynecology program. When I first started, they weren't doing any laparoscopic, like hysterectomies or myomectomies, and now it's of our hysterectomies, it's like over 95% are laparoscopic, which is great for patients because they get to go home the same day, and the recovery is a lot faster.
And that's how we know each other. So, you also have 5 children.
Yes, and I'm also a parent of 5 children.
And that's what we want to talk about. How are you handling, you definitely have a lot on your plate. And when I was doing surgery and you guys were rolling me in, there was a lot of people in there. So you're also teaching some students over at UCSF. And how do you handle all of that? Because you also have 2 kids with special needs.
I do, and it is a bit of a juggle, of course, to maintain work-life balance. But honestly, sometimes I think I'm not handling it. People ask me how I do it, and sometimes I'm saying, well, sometimes I feel like I'm not doing it. But but it's just having your everything, having your schedules in place, and having people you can rely on, and having everything set up, I guess, to help out with that.
Right. Well, you also have a 10-year-old, right? That's your youngest. Am I correct?
So I have 5 children. My oldest is my daughter. She's 27. And then I have 4 boys, and they're 22, 16, 12, and 10.
Okay.
So they're all older now. It gets a little easier as they get older. At its worst, I was taking 5 kids to 5 different places every day and then heading to my full-time job as a surgeon.
Right, that's a lot of responsibility.
Right. My 4 boys, my oldest and my youngest are both on the spectrum. Jared, my oldest, originally had severe autism, but he's high functioning, so he has high functioning autism. And my youngest, Cody, 10, does have severe autism. He has global developmental delay, so autism and ADHD, and he's nonverbal. So he's actually a lot of work as well. Jared was a lot of work earlier, and he's gone farther than I would ever have expected, actually. So,
well, he's over at Berkeley, am I correct?
He's at Berkeley. He's in his last year at Berkeley right now. He's in his 5th year. He's taken 5 years, but majoring in math. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, the autism brain right there.
Yes. So he originally was a chemistry major, and he just had a hard time with doing chemistry lab where you have to interact with other people. And then he was having such a hard time with it, and I told him, I was like, why don't you major in math? Because he's always been so amazing at math. And he just said to me, he was like, but math is so easy. And I was like, that's exactly why you need to major in it.
Right.
I showed him some math memes where it was like, if Jack has 4 apples and he gives Jill 2, calculate the mass of the sun.
Right.
And he was like, I don't get that. I'm like, no, it's a joke because it means like, this is what math is like for most people. It doesn't make sense. But for you, it's so easy.
It's really trying to find what makes sense for the child.
Right.
And helping them guide that. And I totally understand that. And now your youngest, we always say when children have autism, right? You meet when someone with autism, it's that one person, right? So you have 2 totally different kids.
Yes, totally different. Cody is 10, and he didn't start walking until he was almost 2. He's still not talking. He can say mama, but that's only if I ask him to multiple times. And that's just totally for me. He'll never spontaneously say it. One thing he can spontaneously say, probably the only word, is no.
He's like, I'm not doing that. I know what that means, right? So I developed a yoga program for children who have autism, and it's actually for kids that are nonverbal. So it's a 10-hour teacher training. So, and I just realized I just told you about that today.
Right.
So do you have any questions that we can there's things that I can kind of help with Cody around self-regulation or into things like that you can think of?
Yes, yeah. I mean, a lot of the difficulties with Cody comes from the fact that he's nonverbal.
Right.
So he can't tell me things, and if I see he's upset, it's really difficult to try to figure out what's causing him problems. But he can imitate, and so sometimes when he gets stressed out, I was telling you how I can say do this, and I'll take a deep breath and I'll inhale and exhale, and I'll just say, Cody, do this. Mm-hmm. And then he will imitate me, and then that calms me down. And it was interesting because I was telling you that I do that with him, and you were asking me to double check like how he's actually breathing, and I never thought to do that.
Yeah, a lot of times kids will say they'll take a deep breath, and if they take a deep breath in and then their stomach goes in, and it's like actually the complete opposites of what they're doing, and that's a skill set that you have to teach. And so one of the things we're telling you is that putting an object and like modeling it and having the object go up and down would be the first step.
Right.
Especially for kids that are nonverbal, because like how do you teach? I always say, like, how do you teach breathing when it's like, what does it mean to take a deep breath? If we're looking at language,
right,
and a child that's nonverbal, like, what does it mean to take a deep breath? It's like, what? You know what I mean? And I think that's like a key part of that understanding that, especially in yoga or other things that we're teaching, it's like, how do we break it down to make it more concrete?
Yeah. I'm really interested in your yoga program because actually one of my sisters is a yoga instructor, and when she comes over and she does yoga, she's just like, yoga's her life. So she'll be talking to me, she'll start doing yoga poses. And I noticed that Cody comes over and he starts imitating her. And so I think he would be really receptive to that. That'd be a good way of engaging him, actually.
Right, and especially for a child that is super anxious. I don't think people realize once you put your head below your heart, it's actually a calming effect. So it helps you with focus, and you're reversing the blood flow too.
Oh.
So little things like that. You'll see a lot of kids, because you say your kid's a jumper. He's like jumping from one thing to the next. A lot of times they're going to be all over the map. But if you just put them like laying down their legs up against the wall, that right there will help. Just kind of help them to refocus.
Now a word from our sponsor, from KFS School K-8.
KFS School is a nonprofit located in San Francisco that has a strong emphasis on individualized social emotional learning curriculum that was created by Vanessa and has been adopted by countless schools across the Bay Area and more. With an emphasis on small classroom settings, one-on-one attention, and a warm and welcoming environment, KFS encourages your child's ability to make choices, problem solve, master skills, and develop relationships further. Find out more at kfsschool.org today. That's kfsschoool.org.
And we're back. So one of the things, being so busy, right? When do you have time to spend time for yourself? And like, what do you do for you? I mean, I think that's a big,
Yes, yeah. It's really hard, but I do martial arts, and for me, martial arts works really well because there's a class that I attend, so it's like time carved out of the week. I go 2 or 3 times a week. I try to go 3 times a week, but I leave my goal as 2 times a week. So if I miss one,
so you're not hard on yourself, right?
Right. Because stuff happens. It's life. So I find that's the best way. And then I walk to and from work. So, and then at work I use the stairs rather than the elevator. And so I just find incorporating things, like making it part of your daily routine and your actual life, it's easier for me that way.
No, 100%. I take the elevator everywhere. Just kidding. I actually stopped. I do this in water aerobics, but I dislocated my knee, so I started going to the JCC and this water aerobics class, and it was amazing. Oh. And the first day, I was like, "Wow, this is really hard." And it's a bunch of older individuals, and I hit somebody in the head with one of the objects. class, of course. And at the end, I was like, that was actually a really difficult class. And they came up to me like, I really hope you come back, because most people don't come back. And it's been like, I love the class.
Oh, good.
Like, everyone's
Yeah.
been really nice, and that's been my way of like helping with my own mental health, right? Because I think it's really important.
Yeah,
'Cause
that's key, to do something you're enjoying.
right. And then again, like when I had surgery with you, of course, and then I couldn't be in the water for like a month. I was like, I really need this back. But I also want to talk a little bit more about, we've talked about, how you're taking care of yourself, but also you take care of a lot of women.
Yes, that's my job.
Yeah. So what are questions that are always coming up for you? Because, right before I had my hysterectomy and I was having all these other things going on with me, and I started talking to other women, and they were all in alignment with what was happening. But if I didn't bring it up, like my heavy periods, the being tired all the time, they wouldn't have talked about it.
Right, right.
So like, how is it that we are not discussing things that are so important that are happening in everyday life?
Right. Actually, a lot of my patients, they become very, they're very surprised to find that the problems that they have are actually quite common, because nobody talks about them.
Right.
And I think in society there's a bit of it's almost a taboo topic to talk about, like menstruation and miscarriage, and things that are very common and that affect women on a day-to-day basis. But it's just people don't talk about it, and until it happens to you yourself, and you actually start talking about it to your friends, and you realize, wow, a lot of my friends have gone through this.
And what was interesting for me is that I was talking to people, and they've never talked to the doctor about it.
Oh, that's interesting.
They just, it's like, well, and in a weird way, because we had, what was it, 10 years ago was the first surgery with you with the fibroids and the cysts.
Right.
And then another one was 5 years later, and then we had the hysterectomy. I thought it was normal.
Right.
So I've always had heavier, like just cycles, and I was always 28 days. So to me, I was like, oh, this is just a normal thing, and this is just how it is for me.
Right.
And so what are signs for other females that are like, is this normal or not normal? Because it wasn't until I was like, this is not going well for me anymore.
Right. Well, most people don't talk about like their flow and their duration. Like most people don't talk about it with their friends. Like you don't actually, how much you're bleeding, but you don't really know how much other people are bleeding. And so you assume that what you're going through is normal.
Right.
Yeah. So typically what we call a normal cycle would be a 28-day cycle, like from the start of one period to the start of the next period, 28 days, but give or take a week. So it would be considered within the normal range if from the start of one period to the start of the next period for you is anywhere from 21 to 35 days.
Right.
If you're bleeding, and then a typical flow would be like 7 to 10 days,
That's typical?
That's typical. Maybe even 5.
I was like
5 days, I would say.
I was like, it's mine always, yeah.
Yeah.
When I had it. And then so what are signs that a woman should be talking to their doctor? So this is the
Right.
biggest thing, where it's kind of like, well, because even when I went to someone else before you, it was like, well, just take some ibuprofen, and I'm like, what is happening here? And so what are things that they should be looking for?
Right. I mean, some things are really easy to measure. Like if you're tracking your periods and you're getting a period every 2 weeks, that's abnormal, and that's easy for you to see that that's abnormal. But we call abnormal flow with a period if it's more than like 80 milliliters per month, and that just doesn't mean anything to people. Like you're not going to know how much you're actually bleeding.
Right.
And so like the medical term we use, like menorrhagia, which just means excessive menstrual flow, is like 80 milliliters per month. And that's just, it's a medical diagnosis, but it's meaningless and it's very difficult to diagnose. So I use impact on your life, so quality of life. Like your period, if you feel like your period is heavy, even if it's only, I say only, but even if it's only 7 days, but if it bothers you and you feel like that's too heavy, it's causing you distress every month, or if your periods are painful to the point where you're missing work. So it's basically how it affects you and your quality of life.
Right. So what ended up happening was 6 months ago, I want to say 6 or 8 months ago, is like that's when I started to really see that oh my gosh, here we go again. My back would go out. I was losing sleep. And it was just so hard for me, just like getting out of bed. And that was when I actually called you, because I was like, I just missed a day of work. And I've never called out. And it was just me being so exhausted, and yet my back is out. I don't know what is what is going on with me. And that's what was whatever on that piece. And then we did an ultrasound and everything else, and it's like, okay, well, the next step would be, and I remember you calling, and of course I said, most families and most parents I deal with, they have this process, right? And I remember telling you this, and I go, they have a process, and I don't need the process. I just need you to be like direct with me, because that's how I like it. And you were very direct, and I go, oh my God, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, as with all things in life, and especially as working with special needs kids, but there's tends to be a process for most things, and
No.
but sometimes you want to just get. I mean, we could go through the process of trying. I like to offer all the options.
You did offer it, but I said, what do you actually recommend? Because I've already had 2 surgeries beforehand. Right. And one of the things you did mention that I didn't realize is that a 3rd surgery could be harder.
Right.
Which I didn't know.
Yeah. So every time you have surgery, the risks actually increase, because you can get more scar tissue that builds up, and the anatomy can get a little more distorted. So having repeat surgeries, like a woman having her 3rd C-section, that's going to be a higher risk surgery than the 1st C-section. Even though it seems like it's the exact same surgery, but just having repeat surgeries, the risks increase over time.
And didn't you have 5 C-sections?
Yes, I did.
I was like, I remember that in text. I was like,
yes, I had 5 C-sections. My last C-section, my husband, I remember he was sitting there with me, and he's like, they're bringing blood into the room. Wait, this is just a C-section, right? And I was like, okay, honey, eyes on me.
You're like, what?
I'm like, yeah, it's just a C-section. Don't worry about it. He's like, wait, it's just like he. I mean, and it's funny, but he wasn't piecing together that no, the 5th C-section is it's going to be a lot riskier than like your 1st C-section or the 2nd C-section. So
and right, and the age too, of course.
Right, exactly.
So
as we get older, it takes longer to heal. From anything, if you twist your ankle, it's going to take a lot longer to heal. And so,
so 5 C-sections.
Right. So
that's definitely a lot to work with.
Right.
Did you need the blood, by the way? Because now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, no, I actually did not need the blood.
Okay. I was like, I don't want to just leave on that note, because I'm like, have a vision. Yeah, like my visual is of like, okay, all this blood's coming in.
Yeah. My 1st C-section was of course the most traumatic for me, because that was an emergency.
Oh, really?
And I could hear everything that was happening. It was making sense to me, and
too much at that point.
It's just knowing too much, and I could hear that the doctors were worried. When my daughter came, there's a score called the APGAR scoring that you score babies when they're first born, and it's a score up to 10, and you want them to have at least a score of 7. And my daughter, they do it at 1 minute, at 4 minutes, and at 10 minutes. And her 1 minute score was 1, which was,
wow.
Basically, she just had a heartbeat, and it was less than 60, which is very low, because at birth it should be 120 to 160. That's the normal range. And then she didn't have any color. She wasn't breathing. She wasn't moving. So I'm there listening to all of them. They're like pushing emergency drugs to help her heart rate, and they're trying to stimulate her. And so I start crying, and my husband has no idea what's going on, because he's not listening. He's just sitting there like, oh, what's happening? Like, she's having pain. He's thinking there's something with me. So that was the most traumatic. And then after that, the second one, I did try to labor, but when the heart rate tracing started having some signs, I was like, no, let's just go to another C-section. And then after that, it's easy, because after
you're like, that's it. We're just planning it. Yeah, we're just going to get the date and the time, and we're just going to
exactly. We're going to have no excitement preceding the C-section. We're going to have a totally boring day leading up to the C-section. It will be a total boring routine C-section. That's what you want with your surgeries: boring, routine, no excitement.
So as you're having, your second child, right? That's your second one who has autism, am I correct?
Right, yeah.
What were the signs, and, what is it that made you think, okay, something's going on? Because as a first-time parent, and there's other people listening, like, what are things that to look for? Because I find that a lot of times as a first-time parent, some things are normal, others not, and then sometimes you have the first kid, and then the second kid comes, and then by looking at the second child, you're like, okay, wait, this isn't.
Yes.
They're passing some of the things.
Right. It was really challenging with my first son, Jared, because first of all, I had my daughter first, and then and she was actually, despite the APGAR scores, she's brilliant. She's a medical resident right now at UCLA. She's the smartest person I know. And she met all of her milestones, and when Jared was not meeting milestones, I was told a lot of things like, oh, well, he's a boy, and that boys develop, there's actually different pediatric charts, like the development chart is different for boys than for girls. Girls, you expect language earlier than boys.
Right.
And so I was getting a lot of reassurances. And then it's just, I think, being a mom, you notice things about your kid. When I transferred from private practice to Kaiser and I got all the records, reading through them, I realized that I was kind of like flagged as a frequent flyer, and kind of like a problem mom at my original pediatricians. Like there would just be notes like brought in again by mom who comes in frequently with vague concerns for her son.
Wow.
And reading it over again, I was just like amazed because I was bringing him in with a lot of vague complaints and.
Because you don't know what you're looking for.
Right.
You're like, this doesn't make sense. I know for a fact that this isn't right, but I don't understand what it is.
And one of them, I remember I was saying, look, I brought him in, like, look, he doesn't look at me. Like I was trying to hold him up. He was an infant at this time. He must have been like 9 months old. And I was like, when I bring him close to me, he doesn't look at me. My daughter always made eye contact with me. But I was like, see, look, I was putting him in front of my face and turning around, and he kept averting his eyes to not look at me. And it's just so interesting because the pediatrician noted that was my concern, but there was no mention of autism or any, I think at that time maybe they didn't know as much about autism.
Right. No, 100%. I mean, I'm 44, so I started when I was 18 working with kids with autism. Mm-hmm. And when I would tell people, they're like, are they artistic? Like, are they artists? Like, right. What is happening? And I go, no, autism is a little different on that, but there wasn't, a lot of awareness.
Right.
So, so then, and then everyone will be like, well, if you see one person, again, we've talked about this before, it's like it's such a big spectrum.
Yes.
Or
when he was 2, one of the entries was, mom brings in son, she's concerned he may have depression. And I remember she was talking about, like, you think your 2-year-old is depressed? And I was like, well, yes. It was vague because I could tell there was something off, and I didn't know what it was. And at that time, I didn't know anything about autism, so I couldn't even put that together. With my subsequent children, I could look for signs. And with Cody, we diagnosed him really early, but because I was already aware of it. Whereas with Jared, I had no clue at all. And I was like, he doesn't smile. He doesn't look up when we call him. He seems depressed to me.
Right.
That's I was familiar with depression and I knew nothing about autism. So in my mind, that's what was happening, was he was depressed. Another time I wanted him to be screened for metabolic disorders. I was just grasping at straws, but I could see reading over the pediatrician's notes that they kind of felt like I was I had a problem. I was overly vigilant with my son and looking for things.
Because you're a doctor too, right? So then that's the other thing.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, just look at and then when was he diagnosed then?
So he was diagnosed, he was almost 4.
Okay.
And by that point, it became
clear,
obvious that it's not normal, he's not speaking yet, So I think, by that time we had already transferred over to Kaiser, and he did have his official diagnosis of autism, which actually I had started reading a lot online about the symptoms he was having, and I actually ended up diagnosing him with autism. And then when I brought him in to the neurologist at Kaiser, then they confirmed the diagnosis, and they did official testing that actually confirmed it.
And then the youngest, how old when you got the diagnosis, since you know the science?
Right. So he actually, less than 1, they started.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they started thinking that there was an issue with him. The 3 younger than Jared, they started screening him early on. they all actually went through this program at UC Davis, the Mind Institute.
Yeah,
They
I
do
know
a
the
lot
Mind
of-
Institute. Yeah.
They do a lot of autism work, and so they screen siblings at an earlier age. So they brought up some concerns with, like with my other two kids, they were looking at them. My son Tyler actually, he was a little speech delayed, but he didn't have autism. But we're able to get him speech therapy early, and because we're screening earlier
Everything.
and picking up earlier.
Okay.
So with Cody, he started having signs actually less than one, which it's amazing now. They do assessments for kids who you're not expecting to be verbal, but just based on things like eye contact.
A couple things to look at is like if a child points.
Yes.
Right. And
yes.
that those are some things where your child's always gonna be grabbing your hand to take you to where they want something, but they don't
Right.
have that language.
Yes.
And then you have the eye contact is another thing.
Yeah. Or I think what they called something like, reciprocal social behavior, or like when my neurotypical kids, when they see something interesting to them, or if they see something happening, they'll look at it and then they'll look at me to see like
They're
my
referencing,
reaction.
right?
Oh yeah, that's what social
There's
referencing.
they're social referencing,
So
and
they're
there's that
seeing
mirroring
like,
piece.
yeah, like, is this okay? Like, what's happening here? They'll look at me. They'll look at what's happening. But my sons Jared and Cody, they never did that. Like I could see, or with injuries, if they injured themselves, they wouldn't come try to find me.
And a lot of times you'll find these kids have very high pain tolerance.
Yes.
And so they're always jumping on everything. They're doing stuff, and it might look like they have ADHD too, because the hyperactivity, and they're
Right.
kind of like going all over the place. I mean, so that's definitely a sign, or they're just always they want it, and they also want a lot of deep pressure.
Right.
A lot of deep
yes.
pressure of like, okay, that's how we calm them down, how we're doing that, and things.
Yeah.
So
Well, one time when Cody, he liked to escape a lot, so he escaped in the house into the garden, and we brought him back. But then for a couple days, he wasn't jumping around like he normally did. And then finally, I looked at his foot closely, and he had like a little pebble that was embedded in his
Right.
foot. And he didn't come to tell us, And so I actually ended up digging this out. And then after a day, he started jumping all over the furniture.
he's like, I'm back.
And then my husband was like, can we get that pebble again? Can we put that
Well,
pebble back?
when I was younger, when I was starting in this field, I remember I had a kid who was nonverbal,
Okay.
and he had a headache, and guess where he put his head? And it got like, that's what we had found out. It was so bad, but he put his head in the toilet. It was almost like, get rid of
wanted
that
to cool
pain
down or-
and cool down. Yeah. So you have to really look at the nonverbal cues,
Right.
So you have to be able to know, like, okay, what is it that's going on by the nonverbal communication? And when you start to really understand that piece, then you'll start to understand what's happening
Yes.
with
yeah.
a child.
But so I couldn't believe that Cody was walking around with this thing in his foot for 2
Right.
days that was preventing him from his normal behaviors. And he didn't even think to like maybe come and tell us, or show us, versus a neurotypical kid would.
Right.
That'd be the first thing they would do.
It's also if you're hungry or not.
Right.
A lot of times you don't that sensation they might not understand.
Yes.
So they don't know, and so like that's another thing you have to teach, or like you have to go to the bathroom. That's why they have a lot of accidents,
Right.
Because they're not being able to feel their own body and what they're doing.
Right. Or if we're out, we have to make sure that we're bringing him to the bathroom frequently, because he won't ever tell us that he needs to go. He'll have an accident before he'll tell us he needs to go. And so we need to just be cognizant, like, let's just take him every hour, every 2 hours. We'll just take him whether he needs to go or not. For accident prevention.
There you go. We have accidents all the time. No, a lot of that. Well, listen, it was so great having you.
Yes, well,
It's
thank
been
you.
like, I don't know, it's been an amazing experience knowing you. Every time I see you, I just learn so much.
Yeah, well, it's been amazing knowing you and all the great parenting work that you do. And I've been checking out your podcast, and
Thank
it's
you.
been wonderful. So thank you.
Right.
Thank you for listening to Parenting with Vanessa Colon. And if you have any questions about your child or want to hear other tips, please go to Vanessa's website, vanessacolon.com at VANESSAKAHLON.com, or email colonfamilyservices@gmail.com.